If you're just honest with people, and
Right.
if you work hard and you're more prepared and you're direct, if there's challenges, hey, I need you to be here Thursday morning at 7. Of course, I would love it if everything was there 100%, but I want to tell you in advance, the cabinets didn't come for the hall bath.
Right.
So I need you to install everything else. And somehow I'll figure out a way you to come back in 2 weeks and we'll get that one last vanity. Just be honest when direct about it. My point here, Jeff, is that I learned it's about influence. People respond to influence if they're treated right, if you're direct, if you're honest, if you're clear, if you acknowledge, challenges, if you explain to them why it's important
Right.
that you do something that's a little different than the norm. So those same learnings and takeaways just naturally became part of my leadership aptitude as I shifted to more internal leading other managers and more of a traditional executive role. I think those same insights about influence informed what I became as an executive and eventually leader of the organizations that I led.
This is The Rise Leader, the podcast dedicated to empowering today's leaders to create lasting impact. Each episode delivers insights, strategies, and inspiration from top professionals and visionary thinkers, designed for those leading teams on the front lines and from the executive suite. Discover actionable tools and inspiring stories to elevate your leadership journey. Step up, make a difference, and join the Rise Leader community.
Welcome to the Rise Leader podcast, where we are committed to sharing actionable leadership insights to empower our community to level up their leadership. Today's episode is sponsored by Learning Edge, your source for energy efficient building education. Really looking forward to today's episode, which I'm titling Creating Great Company Culture. I have my guest, Andy Warren. I'll give you the official introduction and then some comments about what our relationship has meant, Andy. But I'm excited to welcome Andy from Homebuilding and Real Estate Executive, board member, investor, and entrepreneur. He is the co-founder and president of Build to Stay, which is redefining group travel with luxury. It is also purpose-built communities for top leisure markets. Looking forward to maybe hearing more about that. He's also the president of Coronet Communities, focus on environmentally conscious build-for-rent residential developments. Andy has had leadership roles at Maracay Homes, EYA, and Winchester Homes. Andy has a proven track record for driving innovation and home building with exceptional teams. He's deeply engaged in community. I hope we get a chance to talk about this as well. From the Greater Phoenix Economic Council to the Urban Land Institute, Andy's insights have been featured in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and his career exemplifies leadership and innovation. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. It's awesome to be here.
Absolutely. I've been so looking forward to this conversation. I've really tried to be intentional with some of the first episodes that we've shot. You were one of the first people that I thought about because I've sort of adopted the leader of leaders tagline for myself. And I thought, who would be more impactful to interview than one of the most powerful leaders in my leadership development, right? So that being you. And there's two specific things that I wanted to hit on before we get into the standard questions about creating great company culture, which I really had a chance to do under your tutelage. It was really a next level experience for me. And so that's why I hope we get a chance to talk about some of those things today. But number one, I would say on the list, it was your 60th birthday. I think when your family reached out to me and they were trying to get people that were in your life and career to shoot little videos about what you meant. I remember shooting a video in my own backyard, just a little selfie video. The couple of things that I said there were really next to my own father, who has been the most pivotal influence in my life, and then early career, work ethic, and all those things. So he's definitely number one on the list. But you were definitely number one on the list as far as career development and leadership. You came into my life and my career at a very pivotal time. The market was terrible. I think you came out here, what, in 09,
09, yes.
right, from the DC area. And I was in a director level position in an organization, like many organizations in home building at that time, that were basically reeling from the spiral down. Your influence on that organization and the rebuild, that's what I hope we'll talk about a little bit today. Number one on my list was Andy has definitely been the biggest influence in my career development and leadership. And that's specifically what this podcast is about, leadership development for frontline leaders. I know we'll get a chance to talk about that, because we only just cover the highlights of your executive level career. Maybe that might be a fun place to start, because you mentioned in our pre-conversation, a lot of these lessons about leadership started way back when you were in the field as a superintendent. My general first question is, how has your career path shaped your leadership style? So that might be a fun way to unpack how you got here today.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for those kind words. It was really, a highlight of my life's journey to do the turnaround that we did at Marikay, which eventually became TriPoint. It was an exhilarating experience, and we were a team that pulled that off. It meant a lot to me as well, but thank you. It's wonderful to hear those words. Thank you for the opportunity to share today. It gave me a chance to reflect in a way that I hadn't in a long time about some formative places in my life as it relates to professional leadership and strategy. I have two examples that I think are pretty meaningful that sort of helped me, even though I didn't realize at the time, like kind of hone my craft or my passion for leadership. And the first one goes back even further than my days in the field as a construction project manager. When I was in my early 20s, I had a job working for a company called American Wholesale Beverage, which was a beer and wine importer and distributor in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay.
And my job was, I was like the route guy, so I get there at 4 a.m. and the truck would be all loaded up. I would drive out and spend my day going to deliveries to both restaurants and pubs, but primarily a lot of grocery stores.
Okay.
Like Winn-Dixie,
Sure.
Piggly Wiggly,
Sure.
the kinds that populated the landscape in North Carolina. And so if you go to a Safeway at 6 a.m. and you see guys, stocking the shelves, those aren't Safeway employees.
Right.
That's like the Frito-Lay guy or,
Right.
whatever. And so I wasn't very good at this job at all.
Okay.
But it was a job, right? A lot of times people talk about your career journey as if it was this intentional thing that unfolded. But really, I'm just in my 20s. I needed a job, right? So this was my job. I wasn't really very good at it. To be good, you need to be really fast.
Okay.
You can't ever knock over your stack of beer and wine and spend 3 hours mopping it up. For whatever reason, the owner of this distributor saw something in me. Their warehouse was kind of a wreck. The guy that was their warehouse manager had left. So he took a chance on me and moved me into this management role of the warehouse. I had never had direct reports. I had never been a boss. This was my first chance to do that. And the warehouse really was in bad shape.
Okay.
It was poorly organized, and I didn't know too much about it, but I spent the next 7 or 8 months turning this warehouse around with the, by sort of leading this team of people, like 7 or 8 people, kind of blue collar, not necessarily super motivated. None of them had career aspirations and wanted to get ahead. And when I went into this role as part of the problem, it was the same group of people that became really part of the solution. Upon reflecting back on it, I realized, what they needed was a vision, a leader, an organizer. And we just had a blast. We had a lot of fun turning this thing around. You don't have the benefit in an ongoing warehouse operation to shut things down for 2 months and open back up every morning. The trucks had to go out. So I somehow it came to me in my head, hey, this is what we need to do over the next several weeks or months to get this thing in shape. And I worked really hard because I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
And I think role modeling that work ethic was a powerful part of it. But I just was having fun. And somehow that fun became infectious with the group.
Okay.
And we transformed this place. That was my first opportunity. And now, as I reflect back on it, I had this notion of, whoa, it was fun being a leader. It was like really cool. I couldn't have done this on my own. Right? Took this group of people. All right. So then life, handful of different reasons, a year or so later, I found myself working for a large home building company, US Home Corporation, which eventually merged with Lennar.
Right.
I was a construction superintendent is what our title was of the role. And I would say in an additional, very significant way, it informed me or informed the journey that I was on to eventually get into leadership, vision, and strategy.
Sure.
The really interesting thing about successfully leading in that context is you are not a direct supervisor of the people you're coordinating.
Correct.
You really have to get things done through influence rather than just top down. You got to do it because I'm the boss, right? In theory, any one of these trades, if the market was strong at all, could say, you know what, we're not picking up on what you're putting down.
Right.
We're going to send you some bad crews. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way. When I was a young man, I was still, in my mid-20s at the time. Somehow I had this notion of this paradigm of you need to be like the big alpha male on the job site. If you scream more or if you're more of a bully, that's how you get things done. And I made mistakes along those lines, thinking that's what I needed to do. That wasn't me at all. That's not my nature. But eventually I figured out if you're just honest with people and
Right.
if you work hard and you're more prepared and you're direct, if there's challenges, hey, I need you to be here Thursday morning at 7. Of course, I would love it if everything was there 100%, but I want to tell you in advance, the cabinets didn't come for the hall bath.
Right.
So I need you to install everything else. And somehow I'll figure out a way you to come back in 2 weeks and we'll get that one last vanity. Just be honest when direct about it. My point here, Jeff, is that I learned it's about influence. People respond to influence if they're treated right, if you're direct, if you're honest, if you're clear, if you acknowledge, challenges, if you explain to them why it's important that you do something that's a little different than the norm. So those same learnings and takeaways just naturally became part of my leadership aptitude as I shifted to more internal leading other managers and more of a traditional executive role. I think those same insights about influence informed what I became as an executive and eventually leader of the organizations that I led.
Sure. So the frontline version, and what I took away was several things. Maybe one of the most standout was from that very first experience with the warehouse of actually tackling something like that, and then the enthusiasm of having fun with a group. And I think the other big takeaway from me was, whether it was the owner or whoever, yeah, these folks in here are part of the problem. This is not working. But it seems like from your experience, it was that vision and that organization that you were able to apply with a group who, seemingly were lost or disheveled, right? Because you said the warehouse itself was a disaster when you went in there. Ultimately, that just sounds like lack of direction, because it is, I think by your story there, it's essentially the same group of people that end up helping turn that around.
It was the exact same group of people. and for the owner who kind of saw this thing unfold, I remember pretty clearly that being the thing that he found the most remarkable, right? Was like this ragtag group, that he perceived as, not up to the task, ended up being the very group that sort of really turned this thing around.
Right.
And yeah, it was about respecting them. I'd never run a warehouse.
Right.
And frankly, initially, they were probably thinking, who's this college puke coming in here who doesn't even know how to drive a
A
forklift?
fork.
I got pretty good with the forklift after a while.
Right.
I did bring certain aptitudes that were needed. I asked them to help me learn on this adventure. We turned it around and had fun. People love to be part of a team that's like kicking ass,
Right.
on a journey and then having success. And it can be a really exhilarating and fun experience. And yeah, so
It's the
crazy.
perpetual, to me. It's the motion, right? The
Yeah.
momentum that you get from a team that is winning. And
Yeah.
I guess the last closing thought I have on your warehouses experience, it reminds me of that Navy SEAL saying, which is, there's no such thing as bad teams. There's just bad leadership. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't bad folks on teams,
Sure.
but generally the first place to look is leadership. And I think that's a great example. The other thing that I wanted to hit on your early experience, frontline leader, superintendent on a job site, you mentioned a couple of things there. One, being humble to the trades, and first of all, acting like you didn't know everything, because you didn't. You'd made some references to making mistake, maybe taking on some preconceived notion of what it was like to be a construction manager, where you'd have to be the alpha guy. The trades themselves are a pretty bravado laden group.
Yeah.
So it probably sort of trends higher,
Mhm.
right? And in that realm. But I love the fact that you mentioned being humble to the group and admitting, like, either I don't know the scenario, or I don't necessarily know what the end is here, but can we be open, right? Or I don't know, the way it worked for me in the field oftentimes was one of the best approaches, especially in my very, very early days, was to just go and be humble and say, hey, I'm not an expert in this, and I'm asking you for your advice here. Maybe framing foreman or whoever it might have been that was the expertise that I didn't have. And I was like, what would you do here? If you were me in this position, what would you do? I think that's very powerful. And I think too often that's what young leaders are missing, right? And maybe it's not missing, but just, I think from your own story, it's an evolution.
Yes.
Right?
Inevitably, you're going to be working with people that are much stronger subject matter experts than you are in that thing. And I think, especially for young leaders, they're feeling the weight of that leadership responsibility that they've been given. And they don't want to be seen as a poser or an imposter. Perhaps they can make the mistake of pretending that they know more than they know. I will tell you, that was me. There were times where I was a poser, I was trying to, act like, hey, I'm in charge and this is how we're going to do it. And it just didn't work. Right. And so even to this day now, when I find myself interacting, whether it be professionally or in managing my household, I just loved saying, hey, bear with me for a minute. I don't really fully understand that. Will you please explain that to me? That helps me a lot, because then I'm better informed. But it also shows a lot of respect for whoever it is that you're interacting with. They're like, hey, no one's ever asked me that before. Let me tell
I
you
love
about
that.
it. So it's kind of a cool
I love that.
win-win.
Okay. As far as the theme of today's podcast, which is building great company culture, and again, that's what I really got to see in working in that pivotal part of my career with you, is how you intentionally took the people that you were working with in our Marrakech Homes in 2009 environment and created this culture that went on to be profitable and successful and growing and all these other things. But the thing number two that I didn't mention in the beginning, one was, your big impact in my career. But I still mention this even in presentations I do today as a highlight in my career, where we won best places to work. And to me, that has always sort of stood out as a milestone because it was that best places of work where the employees vote, right? Not the beauty contest, or put your name in a hat and see who's going to win this year, but where the employees vote you in. And I, for one, am just so proud of that. It seemed like, in addition to being financially successful and growth and all the other things that we were able to achieve within Mary Kay and then TriPoint, the best places was the cherry on top and another outside validation of what we knew from working inside, even being senior level executives. You could tell just by the culture that we had built. I mean, clearly creating that kind of culture, for me, that's a pinnacle sort of highlight of my home building career.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. It was a wonderful affirmation. It was also at the same time that we were really hitting our stride in terms of industry metrics of success, profitability, growth, and the other kinds of things that any large, in this case, publicly traded company is going to be very much interested in. It was a cool affirmation and validation that you can achieve those kinds of results at the same time as having a wonderful company culture where people felt like they were part of the team and on a really cool mission together. For the viewers of the podcast, I will share it was not just the best places to work in the construction industry or in the home building business. This was the Arizona Republic working with the leader in this space, and Mary Kay was identified as the top place to work across all companies, all industries in the state of Arizona. The year before, you might remember we were at the award ceremony and we ended up coming in second.
Right.
We were disappointed. So
it
wasn't just
rally call.
It wasn't just a flash in the pan, right? It was, it's, several years of sustained success in that space. What I will say is, and not maybe last reference to my days as a construction project manager, we'll pivot more towards where we're focused. But I think there is a parallel where there isn't one formula for success.
Right.
You just need to be true to who you are and execute that formula that makes sense and works for you. And so my point is, there's lots of companies, other home building companies that could and did and today have great financial performance and great results.
Sure.
And aren't about to win, best place to work. There were construction project managers who were the alpha males, right? Got things done successfully and ran really good projects through the strength of their will and dominance over, right? And I tried to play that game and I did, it just didn't work for me because that wasn't who I was, right? And so I think our success at Mary Kay was, hey, this is who we are. We want to do it as a team. We want to have fun together. We want to respect one another along the way, but we also want to get these kind of great results.
Yep.
I mean, I won't name any names, but a very significant competitor of ours in the home building business that was having similar success that had a radically different culture, right?
Sure.
Very top down, a little bit like what I was talking about, a little bit of a bully mentality, and they were having good results. So there isn't one particular formula for success. I think, for leaders, you have to really be introspective and aware of who you are, what you're all about. Don't try to pretend to be someone you're not. Have that be the path to your leadership journey.
Love that.
Yeah.
So where I want to start is one of the most foundational parts of creating a great company culture. And I'm talking specifically about the one-page plan, which I had not even seen in my lifetime until you brought that concept to our organization. Could you just share with the community the Cliff's Notes version of the evolution of the one-page plan, and then maybe a little bit about how we used it in our organization?
Yes. I had the good fortune to work with that approach with the company you mentioned, which is in the Washington, D.C. area. And actually, one of the founders of that firm was introduced to it through his experiences with YPO.
Okay.
When I've described it, I would say the concept is, if you have the approach organizations often take towards strategy is bring a whole bunch of people together, spend a couple of days working on, sort of some complex, business strategies, create like, reams and reams of, paper, have this thing, and then kind of put it on a shelf and don't, visit it until
Right.
9 months into the year and say, oh, wait, we're behind.
Where are we
doing
at?
So I think it was Vern Harnish, or one of the architects of the original template that I was using, which we morphed a lot over time, basically made the point, if you can't get your strategy onto a single sheet of paper,
Right.
you got to figure out a way to sort of distill this down to be a little bit more, create the essence of what you're trying to do. So I had the good fortune of working with it at EYA, and we had some very good success. My time at Mary Kay. What I did when I joined Mary Kay, you might remember, Jeff, is I came in May of 2009. I didn't know anything about the Phoenix market or the existing team, and I didn't fully understand the challenges that we had as an organization. So I really spent 6 or 7 months just getting to know. It wasn't like I, brought the leadership team together, on the second month I was there and said, this is how we're going to do it. Frankly, had a chance to maybe earn some credibility and respect with you and the other people on the team. So it was 6 or 7 months into it before we launched into it. The power is to be able to, in a concise and organized way, go across the entire spectrum of vision and big picture. This is who we want to be.
Yep.
This is the essence of what we're all about. This is where we want to be 10 years from now, lofty stuff, to a little bit more tactical stuff, to very precise quarterly actions.
Yep.
And to have them link together in such a way where you can feel confident. If we really focus on the next 90 days in these quarterly activities, we know that they are linked to our annual performance. And we know if we are able to successfully pull off what we're trying to do on an annual basis, it's going to drive our 3 to 5 year performance.
Sure.
And we know that if we're able to pull that off, we are in fact achieving these kind of lofty, longer term vision. So I think sometimes what can happen is this breakdown between sort of tactics and strategies. Like if you focus just on strategy and you sort of harp about who we want to be and this vision of the future, but you don't build it with
Sure.
tactical month in and month out activities, well, you're just going to be doing that forever. Right. And if on the other hand, you're just focused on quarterly results and tactics that are very near term and like quarterly driven, you're really never going to find yourself appreciably improved or different as an organization.
Right.
It's just a series of short-term results. So the one-page strategic plan, I believe, is the recipe that I found works exceedingly well to drive the kind of results,
Yep.
but to have confidence that those results are driving you to the accomplishment of the new and better organization, that you have this vision for.
Absolutely. So a quick thank you, because that model that you introduced us to in 2009, that I then got a chance to, we worked the system together for over a decade, and now that has turned into what my career has been post home building, working through organizations and sharing one-page plans and the elegance of the system and how all those things work together, both big picture, near-term vision, and the linkage between all of them. Segue to my next question. We can drop names here because we did have the chance to work with one specific coach the entire time at Mary Kay. I wanted to talk about the importance, and I don't recall if you had a one-on-one coach before Mary Kay like you did with Keith at our organization, but I got a chance to benefit. I know you were working directly with Keith as our coach in that entire time, working on the one-page plan together, but I just wanted to hear your sort of, because I don't even think I've ever really asked you this, like the impact of having a coach. And so who I'm alluding to here is Keith Cupp, who
Sure.
was our coach. I think you went through a short interview process that we're folks that were really tapped into the Rockefeller habits up front. Keith was not only the short list guy, but the one that you picked. I really just want to hear, it doesn't need to be about your relationship specifically, but just the benefits of coaching. And I know it has even evolved into more like a lifelong friendship, right?
Sure.
It certainly has for me. And I was the ancillary figure in this conversation. So anyway, I'd just love to hear you talk about the coach, having a coach in general and benefits.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think I can really speak to this in a very insightful way. So when I first got acquainted to the one-page strategic plan approach with this organization, EYA, we actually attended a 2-day seminar that this gentleman, Vern Harnish, was kind of walking, us, but also, 8 or 10 other organizations, big banquet room, with probably 8 or 10 different organizations. There were breakout sessions and you had the opportunity to populate the different aspects of the approach. And then we set about over the next couple of years using this approach, but we did not have a coach. I was a partner in this firm and the chief operating officer. This was kind of my knack. I was self-performing the role of the coach, but also
running a business.
Running a business. Yeah. We had a reasonable amount of success with it, but there was no question in my mind when I came to America that the one thing I wanted to do differently was to work with a coach. At the time, I was thinking almost more facilitator. Right now,
Okay.
I came over time to appreciate the value of the real coaching side that Keith Cup brought to our relationship. Initially, I was just like, I want to have an outside facilitator because I realized when I was with EYA that you really can't do both effectively.
Right.
If you're the CEO or the leader of the organization and you're trying to be the facilitator, you're either going to be because of your role, just too dominant in the experience of working with your leaders. You got the pen and you're chartboarding and working with the group and you're just talking too much. And you're leading it and people are like, well, he's the boss,
right?
She's the boss, whoever that person might be. That is going to stifle the group dynamic. So that's one big problem with it. You're kind of worried about being a good facilitator. You're kind of looking at your watch and you're like, hey, we need to, get moving along here.
Right.
And it robs you of the opportunity to really be thoughtful and reflective about, hey, I'm the leader here. I'm one of the team of leaders. And I really want to be reflective and contribute from a content standpoint. So I got a chance to interview 2 or 3. I found Keith, we were very much similar in terms of our worldview and core values. And, I think also our temperaments. So it was a really good fit. And had no idea when I asked him to work with us in 2009 that we were going to be working together for the next 10 or 11 years. But it was a great journey. And we got into a really good cadence and he got to know us over time, really got to know us both as people, but also learn more and more about our business. I guess one other thing I'll say that people make a mistake as it relates to strategy is there's nothing about your day-to-day of running an organization that makes you a really good, practitioner of business strategy.
Yep.
Right. Because you're in there, you're getting the job done. You're trying to grow your business. You're trying to hire people. You're doing things that are like these recurring activities that you do every day and you get really good at. Strategy is something that you do like maybe once a quarter. Right. And so why do you think you're going to be good at these at these non-recurring activities? So when you tap into the power of someone like yourself that makes this their calling, or Keith, they get really good at these disciplines of strategy and these approaches of strategy. And so you get to tap into that expertise because it is a recurring activity. So for Keith, he was used to leading or helping to not lead, but like coach a number of different organizations across a number of different industries, to be successful. But over time, as he developed a deeper appreciation for the subtleties of the construction business, I think he became even more powerful in that space.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And ended up being such a value add, I think, to, your own leadership and where we were, or even where you were as you guided the organization forward, but then also for next level leaders that were involved in those conversations, even though it wasn't nearly as direct and one-on-one, whether it was just always probing about what we were reading or suggesting other books to read.
Sure. Yeah.
His level of engagement was, that's why he's still just, very high on my list of mentors today. So where I'd like to transition next, this was like probably the one thing that like I was hoping we would get a chance to talk about, or I wanted you to be able to share with the community. And for, we could probably have a 3-hour podcast. We could probably have 3 podcasts on all of the things that I would love to unpack about our work together in over a decade, but I'm sort of just picking my best of that we can cover in one episode today. And so starting with things like strategy and coaching, but where I wanted to go next, then there's a couple of other things that I do want to hit on, like communications or meeting rhythms, things of that nature, which to me made for a really effective organization. But what I want to talk about next is probably the number one thing that I do with organizations today is talk about people.
Okay.
Right? People at the senior executive level, who makes up your leadership team, and then ultimately who makes up your team. And you may have had this even before you got to Marikay, but I remember it distinctively. It was one of the first things that you shared with me and the other senior leaders was your 3-legged stool for people, right? So find the right people, equip them with the resources they need to be successful, and hold them accountable for results. So I'd love to just have you sort of unpack those 3, whether that was a genesis of something you'd done in previous lifetimes that, in my mind took on a whole life of its own in my career and our work together, but people as a cornerstone of business. I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. We called it the 3-legged stool, people, right? And the whole idea there of the 3-legged stool approach is that, if any one of the legs of the stool was not there, the stool would fall over, right?
Right.
So you really need all 3. And I believe that most organizations or many organizations are not good in at least one, and in some cases multiple. And I don't really it was not something that I think I ever read. I mean, there's a lot, of course, of great content around these ideas of people and accountability and recruiting. But I think it crystallized honestly for me when we were first getting started with at Marikay. Hey, this is going to be our approach. It's going to be rooted in our team and our people, and that's what we're going to use to drive our success. And then how do you do it in such a way that it's not just lip service, like up with people, right? Hey, our team is like our team is our number one asset. It's like, okay, sure. Like a lot of organizations
say things
say
like
that, well, how do you really kind of put some meat to it? So just to walk through each leg of the stool.
Perfect.
So, start with the right people. What I found is that, when times are good, or maybe even not when times are good, but especially when times are good and you're growing and you're feeling the pressure to fill roles, a lot of times, hiring managers just can compromise and just say, we want to have a body, right? Hey, I got to fill this position. And any person in there is better than it being vacant, which is totally wrong, right? I mean, it's a lot worse to have the wrong person in that position. I'd rather have it be vacant, just like, lean on the existing team. So there are really, full and existing, best practices to bringing in good people. And you just need to have some rigor to it, right? So, in our case, it was, hey, the hiring manager is ultimately going to be responsible for that. They're not just going to pick up the phone and say, hey, HR, I need, someone to fill this position. It's always going to be the person that's going to be responsible for managing that person that
Yep.
has the primary responsibility for, sourcing and,
Vetting,
hiring and
yep.
yeah. And then we probably don't have time to get into it right now, but there's recruiting strategies that are best practices that you can tap into. For sure, there are interviewing best practices that you can follow that have rigor to them, that can help you to sort of like ferret out the people that either aren't a cultural fit
Sure.
or really have some gap in the skill sets that
Sure.
you're looking for the role. And then there's also the opportunity to take that person in their initial entry into the organization and infect them with like the vibe and the culture and the spirit and the vision that you
onboard.
never get a
Yeah.
second chance to do, right?
Yep.
Which is this onboarding experience. And I used to use the example of everyone, if you've ever moved and you moved when you were 13 years old and you were in 8th grade and you're now 57 years old, you'll be able to tell me in rich detail what your first day of school was like,
Yep.
because it's such an impactful thing. Or similarly, if you just talk to people that have had 2 or 3 significant tenures in organizations on their career, is you should do this as an experiment. Ask them about their first day or their first week of their when they were
Experience.
at their new, and they'll be able to remember because
Yep.
they're so impressionable. Anyway, so that's another key component of
Yep.
starting with the right people. Okay, equip those people with the resources they need to be successful, right? So I think as managers and leaders, that is our number one responsibility, right? If we're building teams, if we have a bunch of people that are working for us, we need, we have no right to sort of like, be holding them accountable if we haven't given them the tools and the resources they need to be successful. So, I know that you have a number of construction clients, so let's
Right.
kind of use that as
Sure.
an example. It doesn't have to be in that space, but that could be things like scheduling software, or even just having like if you're a construction project manager, you have you as a leader needs to make sure that the purchasing group is doing a really great job of sourcing the right trades that they should be working with. And so having that team member have the resources, the tools and the skills that the training
Sure.
that they need to be successful, I think is as a key responsibility for leadership and management.
Yep.
It's not fair to try to hold them accountable for results if you haven't given them
the proverbial one arm tied behind your back.
right. Yeah. Now, then the third leg is if you've started with the right people and you've done a good job, giving them the good resources, then it's totally fair game to hold them accountable for results. And at Marikay, I think one of the things that was really powerful for us is people want to be part of a winning team. And so if this is like NFL playoff season right now, so if you're if you're a quarterback coach, if you're a quarterback, you want to feel like someone's holding the offensive lineman accountable and doing a good job coaching them up. And
Sure.
if you're like an offensive lineman and you're getting your head pounded in by defensive linemen, you want to feel like, I'll go through that. I just want to make sure that someone's coaching up this quarterback, that I'm not just doing this for nothing, right?
Right.
And so people want to be, I think, on a team where other people are being held accountable, and we as leaders have a responsibility to do that. Or if you've got a group of 5 project managers and 3 of them are really good and 2 of them are like dead weight, and you're working your tail off and you're looking over at these other 2 guys and they're getting annual raises and there's
package.
and there's never any kind of like hey, everyone knows these 2 guys are dead wood here.
How does this work?
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a very demotivating thing. So yeah, so holding those team members accountable for results is a key for leadership to drive the kind of performance. And I think many organizations are bad at least 1 or 2 of those, and sometimes all 3. And I think you need to have all 3 to drive the success. And that was the approach that we took that sort of drove down through the entire organization. That's why you and I and other leaders were always so involved in the interview process.
Yes.
To bring the right people into the organization. It was such a part of our monthly and quarterly rhythms to hold people accountable. yeah, so it was an exciting journey.
And at least in the first, year and a half plus, almost 2 years now of my coaching and consulting journey, I can, at least for the organizations that I've worked with, there's so many opportunities. And here is what I've really discovered, Andy, in this, because I was sort of sheltered, and not sheltered per se, but I had a limited perspective by working in our organization. It was very high performing. Of course, I worked with other contractors and I had insights, and you could see other home builders. But as I got out and did more coaching and consulting, I can see how you use that example of another home builder that was, let's call it winning financially. And yet, you sort of knew from the outside that culturally they were not nearly as, let's call it friendly as our scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've really seen in this last couple of years is how, I don't want to say it's easy to succeed in our industry, easy to succeed financially. It's not, I'm not saying that it's never hard,
Sure.
but we're in a, very lucrative industry, and it's, we're in a great market here locally. And so for the most part, what I see is a lot of organizations that are winning financially, right? From a revenue standpoint or profit, the owner, the CEO, the leadership team, the entire team is really benefiting because the organization is growing. But just to move from that financially successful and then to have like all of those other things, and especially company culture, right? To just be getting it done by like hook or crook, or again, we use the example of, probably going at it like super tactically, but not so strategically,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that has been a big realization for me here in the last couple of years, is just how, and that's why I feel like I'll essentially be in business the rest of my life.
Mm.
Because for even organizations that are out there doing well financially, let's say, but, and my classic example is to use a business owner, a CEO, a founder of an organization who is, winning on paper, winning financially, but, couldn't take a 2-week vacation to go to Europe to save their butt, right? Because they'd come back and the, place where their office would be a crater,
Yeah.
right? Or meltdown because they weren't there giving the direction or guiding. And so anyway, that's just sort of a reflection on where I've been recently. And again, sort of a validation for that entire process of intentional focus on people, right? So
Sure.
the theme of the podcast today was creating great company culture, and the word that I usually use is intentionally, right? Which you've sort of drilled into me for the last, decade and a half. So maybe the closing question, not the closing question per se, but the closing theme here, I'll just roll all of these things together. So whether it just be about communication in general, and so clearly as leaders communicate one-on-one, that's super important, but also how we communicate strategically to the entire group. And so I had 2 separate questions here about meeting rhythms and huddles and company meetings and all that. But I think I'll just sort of roll this into one and ask you about the importance and what you've sort of implemented and then learned over the last, decade and a half that we worked together about communication. It did strike me in the very beginning that you were very thoughtful about your communication, but I just saw it go next level
Mm-hmm.
across the time that we worked together. So again, whether that's huddles or all companies or just communication style in general, I'd love to hear your thoughts on communicating effectively as a leader.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I just never wanted to hear anyone, in any organization that I've ever led, is nobody ever tells me what's going on around here.
Right.
And I've always felt that if people were better informed, they could make better decisions.
Sure.
Right. And so we were always very forthcoming about everything, our financial performance, the challenges that we were facing, even if it was, we were in a tough market cycle and, potentially had some, had to lean up the organization,
Sure.
challenges that we face in this industry. So I just always felt that if you're going to equip the people with the information or with the resources they need to be successful, a big part of that is just information. So just sharing it and being sure that how do you do that? To the other point that you mentioned is you have to sort of build in disciplines and cadences where you're going to be doing it, because everyone can get really, really busy with managing the business. And so we relied very much on just these cadences that were just sort of built in, right? So you mentioned every day we would start our day at 8:28 as leadership team with the huddle. You and I as a manager and a direct report, we would build in monthly one-on-one meetings that had a very prescribed agenda. With our entire company, we would build in, we put the dates down at the beginning of every year. These are the days that we're going to be doing our all company meetings. These are the dates and the times that we're going to be doing our strategy sessions.
Yep.
So I just have found that it's just so simple. If you put something on a calendar, it's going to happen, right? Everyone uses, Outlook calendar or Google calendar or whatever you use as an organization. If it's there, if it's scheduled, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so it's just so important. But if you get busy and those dates aren't scheduled, all of a sudden it's 6 months or 9 months before you pulled the organization together.
Right.
So it's super important. If people are better informed, they're going to be making better decisions. That's going to drive better results. You have to be disciplined about making sure that those opportunities are there and that they're not missed.
I think that's another segue back right to why also having an outside coach is another great reason, because they bring rigor, discipline, and accountability, right? They've got the bandwidth outside of the organization, because we know how that works. I mean, even when you have the one-page plan and you have all these meeting rhythms, you still have the customer calls, you still have the challenges of running a business day to day, essentially what your day job is, right? Outside. So maybe another good commercial right there, or tie back to coaching. So I think the last two, I'll just ask you my sort of last two questions, Andy, that I like to ask all of my guests in conclusion. Number one, who has been the most impactful leader in your life or career?
Okay. Well, so first of all, I'll say there wasn't any kind of sort of, hey, mind blowing, I was under this person. And it was, I think I had the benefit to work with a number of really great leaders over the years. There was one in particular named Peter Burns, who led, you're familiar with Winchester Homes, which is a sister organization of Maricay when we were part of the Weyerhaeuser real estate company umbrella. And he was somewhat of a mentor for me, maybe in some ways a similar relationship that you and I had. And why, and what did I learn from him? He was an ethical man that, I had sort of a similar worldview. We kind of shared a faith context that informed how we wanted to, approach all aspects of our lives, including our professional, realm. And, while he wasn't in people's face about that, it certainly informed, his approach. It was principled, it was honorable. I just will never forget something that was intentionally ironic, but what, Peter Burns taught me was, well, when in doubt, tell the truth. And, so it was like, okay, it's funny that you have to say that, right? Right. But it really captured the essence of what, I learned from him, which was, hey, these just life principles are really important wherever you are. And you can be successful in business by just being a man of integrity and telling the truth. So I would say him, but Larry Burrows, lots of great people that I worked with over the years.
Yeah. It's too funny. You just mentioned that in closing. I say this to a lot of the companies that I work with now. It was you that said to me, it's like, hey, there's no such thing as business ethics, right? It's just ethics, right? You're either an ethical person or you're not. And and that's what business is. It's just people. So the last question, Andy, that I ask all my guests, and again, the idea here to share with the community is actionable things that people can either consider. And we've dropped a load of things today, whether it's the one-page strategic plan or focusing on people or those original insights that come from your time as a frontline leader to really give the community actionable insights, right?
Mhm.
So the closing question I like to ask is, what is the best actionable leadership lesson that you've learned in your life or career that, maybe you can reinforce that you've already shared, or if there's something that we haven't covered that the community could take to heart and use going forward in their own leadership development?
Yes. I think it's a restating, but it's fun to put a little, finer point on it, which is just to be true to who you are, right?
Mm,
So like what we experienced together in our journey at America, was really just informed by, who I was and, who we were as a team
sure.
and the things that we, embraced, this team approach and, the values that were important to us. We're just who we are, right? It wasn't like, here's the formula for success and every organization needs to to be like that. And so these things that were so important to me about teaming, about like winning, right? And being people of integrity and respect, so it was that kind of like, I think our organization sort of captured or sort of embraced that approach.
Sure.
But there's other approaches,
Sure.
right? I mean, I was not a particularly technocrat, like into the details on, like there can be organizations and leaders who can be really successful by, really being mindful of the details, right? I was kind of a, big picture kind of guy, right? There can be organizations can be successful if they're, I wouldn't suggest this, but like a workaholic driven thing. And this is what we're all about, right? So, so what I would say, and I would always encourage you, Jeff, when you're working with the different organizations you work with, to not necessarily say, well, hey, here's how we did it in America, so this is what you may be,
Sure.
and I'm sure you don't do this, but
No.
to really hammer the point home is like understand the essence, what is it that the leadership team or the leader, what are they really good at? What's their value set? I think, in the majority of cases, you can build a really great company culture around that, especially if you're celebrating the good and trying to mitigate the bad, right?
Right.
So the answer to your question is really just to be true to who you are and surround yourself people that are like-minded.
Yep.
Use the best of that, to drive your company's success.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast and talk with the community about your experience in business. It was so fun to hear about the frontline leader stories and successes all the way up to the executive level. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you to our sponsor, Learning Edge, your source for energy efficient building education. I'd like to thank our Rise Leader community. And I'd like to also ask you not to forget to subscribe to the podcast, like and share this episode. And if you would be kind, we would love to hear your review. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of The Rise Leader. Thanks for joining us today. To connect further, visit riseleadershipaz.com, where you can find show notes, resources, and more episodes. You can also find The Rise Leader on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback helps us reach more leaders and continue to deliver valuable content. Until next time, remember to step up, make a difference, and lead with impact. This is The Rise Leader, signing off.